flowcharts to action. Design in Visio and execute and Power Automate. The #1 reason people use Visio is to create flowcharts or process maps. However, then taking the next step, moving from a diagram of process steps to executing those steps has been a challenge at best. That's all changed with the integration between Visio and Microsoft Power Automate. It's true that Automate has its own visual layout tool, but it's not Visio. Why not use the best in-class product for each purpose, lay out the process in Visio, and then take action in Automate? Attend this session and see live demonstrations of the important new integration. And then a little bit about Scott. ScottHelmers is the author of 5 books, including Visio 2016 Step-by-Step, Visio 2013 Step-by-Step, and Visio 2010 Step-by-Step, all from Microsoft Press, and is a course author from LinkedIn Learning. He is a business process consultant, application designer, writer, and trainer who is constantly fascinated and energized by the power of Visio, for which Microsoft has named him most valuable professional every year since 2008. He's a co-inventor of TaskMap, a Visio add-in for documenting all aspects of any business process, and has assigned clients in 10 countries. When he's not at his keyboard, Scott can be found riding his bicycle or dabbling in the community theater. So, Scott, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the intro. It's almost like I wrote it myself. It is truly a pleasure to join you all today. As I've already commented, I would much rather have been there for real, but we'll take this. We'll make it work. I am quite flexible for the next hour, and as David already mentioned, if you have questions as we go along, I'd rather have you ask them as I'm talking about something about which you have a question. So feel free to unmute and just shout out your question. I do reserve the right not to answer it then, right at that moment, if it's better answered a little bit later. But don't let that stop you from asking the question. If you prefer to type a question in chat, I've got that on another monitor above me here, so I'll keep an eye on that, or David can do the same and interrupt with a question if you are more comfortable typing it rather than talking it. I do have some live examples. In fact, most of the time we're going to spend in this next hour is live demo. I do have some slides I want to walk through first just to set the stage a little bit for what we're going to do. So let me share here and get started with that. So this is what we're here for. In particular, I'm going to start just with a very general discussion of process mapping styles, and there's a reason for that we'll come to, which is principally that the capability I'm going to demonstrate today is designed at the moment by Microsoft to work with the BPMN templates, the template that's in Visio. So I just want to talk a little bit about BPMN. When we get there, I'll ask how many people are avid users or have never heard of it or whatever, or somewhere in between. But a quick overview of what BPMN is. And then as David suggested in my introduction, the challenge has always been, I can create great process maps in Visio. They may even be brilliant, but that's the end of the path. I really had no way to go from there to being able to execute the process I've designed. And now we're way closer to that by virtue of this solution that we're here to demonstrate today and talk about. And that's the integration between Visio and Power Automate. So the idea is see it and touch it a little bit and see how it works. And then if that doesn't engender some questions, I'm not sure what will, because there's some very interesting ways in which that all fits together that I hope will trigger some responses. Questions and answers at the end. If we need more time at the end, that's great. Otherwise, please, as I've already suggested, feel free to jump in as we go along. You've already heard most of this, yeah, so I don't really need to say, oh, there's that one bit that I don't think I'd mentioned in the bio, but I've also created several courses for LinkedIn Learning, 4 of them in number. You'll see a list of them at the very end of my last slide. Those are all available through LinkedIn Learning, formerly lynda.com, and all 4 of them are about Visio, one aspect or another. The books are real. This is one I will give away. I've talked to David and Neil, and they'll randomly draw a name from among you attendees today and provide me with a postal address, and I'll sign the book and send it off in an envelope. So somebody will win a book today. So let's start. Well, first of all, let me just ask the question: does that agenda, that list of topics, conform with what you are here for today, based on the description that I sent ahead of time? Is there anything I didn't mention that you're anxious to learn about, or anything that I did mention that doesn't sound very interesting? Anybody at all?
Scott, those sounded great to me. But yes, if someone else has a thought or a comment, please pipe up.
In that case, we'll take silence for consent and go. So quick overview then. So what is it that Visio is used for most frequently? According to Microsoft, and by the way, you may or may not be aware of the level of telemetry that the Office suite of products feeds back to Microsoft, all anonymous, mind you, but there's a fairly significant amount. One of the things that Visio reports back regularly is what kind of diagrams people create. And pretty consistently over the last 15 years, about one third of all diagrams created with Visio are using one of the several flowchart templates. Now, actually, if you count how many different kinds of process map / flowchart templates there are in Visio, there are 15 of them in Visio Professional. But if you look at all of them combined, they account for about a third of all Visio diagrams. So I'm just going to talk about 3 that you're familiar with, at least in passing, and 1 that you probably haven't run across before. I have the same process mapped in 4 different ways. Now, we're not going to look at the whole process map today. That could be a subject another time if you care about a detailed description and comparison of these 4 flowcharting styles. But here's a conventional flowchart. So standard flowchart symbols, shapes are linked together. We've got some primary paths, alternate paths, decisions, and so forth. The one thing that's a little different in this particular case is I've used a Visio capability called data graphics to turn on a graphic that represents the number of each step in the process. How to do that is a subject for another conversation another time, but that the circles, the orange circles with the numbers in them, represent the step number, and those are a reflection of a data value that lives inside each shape. Also a subject for another time, though, one of the least utilized capabilities, and yet one of the most powerful capabilities in Visio, is that any shape on any page in a Visio diagram can contain data. You can put it there manually, you can link your diagram to an external data source and import the data, but the fact that you can have data in a diagram allows you to do all kinds of fascinating things, whether it's something as simple as this, or if we move to a flowchart, from a flowchart to a Swimlane diagram. Here we have a graphic that represents the step numbers, but we also have color coding generated automatically by Visio that represents the status of each step in the process. That's data inside the shapes that causes the automatic coloring. If you change the status of a shape, the color of the shape automatically changes. Now, back to these mapping styles, if I go back for a second, you're all familiar with flowcharts, pretty easy to comprehend. Everybody's seen them. Many of you have created somewhere between 1 and 10,000 of them over the course of your careers, I'm sure. Swimlane diagrams, many people like better because they offer the added value of knowing who's responsible for which steps in the process. One downside of a Swimlane diagram is they tend to take more real estate than a conventional flowchart, especially if most of the tasks are concentrated in one lane. That lane gets really, really, really long over multiple pages. As a quick example, in this particular process, for a process by which a company evaluates and acquires technology to solve a business problem, the flowchart version, 20 some odd steps, happens to be 2 pages. The Swimlane version takes 4 pages for just the reason I mentioned. Now, a third alternative moving forward is BPMN, the Business Process Model and Notation. This is a BPMN diagram created with the Visio template for BPMN. The only thing in this diagram that is not pure BPMN are the little triangles. Those are the step numbers. I just happen to use a different graphic in this case, a triangle instead of a circle. But I still liked the value of seeing the step numbers. But the other things that you see, the icon in the upper left corner of each shape, those are, and the way in which the symbols are outlined and used, those are all part of the BPMN standard. Advantages, the shapes are flowchart-like by design. That was part of the design of BPMN. Disadvantage, BPMN has a degree of sophistication and specificity that is by design and offers considerable value, but can be confusing. For example, if you're a casual user or you're the business person for whom you as a project manager or I as a process consultant are working with today, are you going to remember the difference between a little hand in the upper left of a shape versus what looks like a document or what looks like a person's head and shoulders? Those are all valid BPMN symbols that may require some more education or more familiarity on the part of the user. And then the type of diagram, process diagram you might not have seen is this. This happens to be called Task Map. That's a product my company makes. We are business process consultants, and 15 years ago, we finally got fed up with not having a way to create real content-rich, data-rich process maps that enhanced communication and made it easier for people to talk about what was going on in the process. The very quick aside, so if I take task TA06 in the center of the page and blow it up for a second, the idea is, of course, there's a description, there's a responsible role, and if you look at the top center and you see project manager top center, you would probably just intuit that that's who's in charge of this task. That's exactly right. There are people who might act in a supporting role, and those are the person icons that you see below the task shape. Also below the task shape, there's like what looks like a piece of paper icon. Those are the guidelines. Those tend to be documents that contain more information about this step in the process. They can be hyperlinked. You notice the hyperlink symbol to the left. The wrench represents the tools, supplies, materials, forms you fill out, the things that you use to do the work of this task. And we've got time and some other things that we display in a very specific way. The idea in designing Task Map was content rich and yet a simple visual display that was the same no matter who created the map. As you know, with flowcharts and Swimlane diagrams, you give 3 people a set of tools to create them and you'll probably get 3 very different looking things. So we wanted to try to standardize the appearance and the way task maps look. We also can take advantage of those data graphics I mentioned, so we can add some additional data. This diagram happens to be linked to Microsoft Project Online. So where we created the process in the first place, we mapped it in Task Map. We decided to manage instances of the process using Project Online and then feed that data back into the map so we could visualize what's going on as we work our way through the process. So quick overview, just intended to set the stage for, oh, by the way, when Microsoft designed this capability you're here to learn more about today, they happened to design it using BPMN. It is possible to create a standard flowchart or Swimlane diagram that can talk to Microsoft, to Power Automate, but out of the box, it requires using BPMN. The idea with BPMN, oh, I said I was going to take a quick poll. So just unmute for a second or toss a comment into the chat session here. What is it that you know about BPMN? Are you using BPMN, or is it something that you've heard of but not ever paid attention to? Anybody? A couple I haven't heard of it, have heard of it, never used it. New to others, first time hearing about it. Okay, that's pretty typical. So thanks. Keep the comments coming. Did use it, know about it, but not in the current environment. BPMN's been around for, geez, almost 20 years. So this is not a new thing. I will tell you it's more widely used outside North America than here. So it's more common in Europe, I find, but it is more complex. And as a result, I find that at least the clients I work with are looking for something a little simpler that they can still use to work with the business folks and also the IT folks and get everybody talking, on the same page and talking the same language. So here's Harry says he has used it particularly with Oracle, the Oracle suite. Okay. Great. So part of the design goal was use recognizable shapes, as I mentioned. Shapes can display a task or what is a decision, actually called a gateway in BPMN. Those shapes can look very different depending on which parameters you set. And again, that can also be beneficial, but lead to some confusion for casual users of the map. So the shapes look like this. I've mentioned variations in what appears in the upper left. So here are a couple of different variations. We saw a hand in the shapes on my sample map a moment ago. The gateway, represented by the diamond shape, can be exclusive or parallel or a variety of other options. So again, visually it can be a little daunting if you're not a frequent user of BPMN, but there is value in that specificity, especially if you're mapping a process that you want to subsequently automate. Big part of the goal for BPMN was that bridge between the map and automation. Well, we're going to do that today, but we're going to use Power Automate and a BPMN diagram. So where do you find BPMN? In Visio, if you click File, New, you will find the Flowchart category of templates, and within the Flowchart category, you'll find a BPMN diagram template with one important caveat. You will not find it if you have Visio Standard. You will find it if you have Visio Professional. So if you look in the Flowchart template category and you don't see BPMN, that's the reason why.
Scott, there's a question from Melissa here. Is there a certain version of Visio that BPMN is available, or is it available across all versions?
Well, in fact, yes, it is only in the Professional edition. So I'll get to something called Visio Plan 2 in a couple of minutes. That's a marketing failure, well, my humble opinion, a marketing name failure on Microsoft's part, but I'll distinguish between that. But most of us who've used Visio for a while are familiar with the fact that there's a Visio Standard and a Visio Professional. This is in the Professional edition. So good question, thanks. When you choose the BPMN template, you will find a blank page as a starting point and 3 sample diagrams. These sample diagrams started appearing in Visio 2016, I believe it was, for some of the templates. Not every template has samples, but Microsoft's idea was, let's give people something other than a blank page to start with. Yeah, we'll provide symbols over in the stencil on the left, but let's also provide a pre-built diagram just as a starting point, and that's exactly what these are. I'm going to use a couple of these starting diagrams with our flow examples in a minute or two. So you might ask, why this picture? Well, this just represents the chasm that has existed between those of us who've been creating processes, designing processes for years, and what we really wanted, which was the ability to execute them. So how have we been able to cross that chasm in the past? Typically not directly from a Visio diagram. But what we're talking about today is something that does bridge that gap. There's the export capability from Visio to Power Automate. Now, what is Power Automate? First of all, one thing you need to know is until last fall, it was called Flow, Microsoft Flow. So if you've heard of Flow or you've heard of Power Automate, they are the same thing, just rebranded or renamed as of the fall. So if you go to the Microsoft website, there's this whole platform called the Power Platform, of which Power Automate is one component. So we've got Power BI and Power Apps and Power Virtual Agents and sundry other things, Power Automate is a means for automating steps in a process. So what do we do with Visio and how does it relate to Power Automate? Well, I mentioned I had to talk about something called Visio Plan 2. Let me just do that now and get it out of the way. So there is Visio Standard. Many organizations have licenses for Visio Standard, and it's fine. You can do flowcharts and org charts and floor plans and many of the kinds of diagrams that many of us have created over the years. You get some sample diagrams and templates, but you don't get as many as if you have the professional edition. So professional has everything that standard does, plus it also has another 4 dozen, and that's not a typo. There are that many more. There are 45 or 50 additional template types that are part of Visio Professional. You do get the starter diagrams as well, but you also get all of the data visualizations. I showed you a couple of simple examples of data visualizations. You get the ability to link to your diagram to external data sources, so you can refresh the data in the diagram. All of the cool data related stuff is in the professional edition. And then there is Visio Plan 2. So like all software companies in the last 5 years, Microsoft has decided they'd rather have you pay them every month rather than one time. So Visio Standard and Visio Professional are perpetual license products. You buy them and then maintenance plan notwithstanding, but you buy them one time and that's the only time you pay money, a big chunk of money to Microsoft. Well, the subscription model is very enticing because companies want your money every month, and that's as a result, what Microsoft has chosen to do is have a subscription version of Visio that is very parallel to Office 365. And guess what? All the latest and greatest, newest, coolest capabilities get added to the subscription version of Visio and not to the older perpetual license versions. So you see several examples on the bottom of the slide, one of which is in orange, the export to Power Automate. But there's something called Data Visualizer. There's this thing called Slide Snippets, which is actually pretty cool. You can take a portion of your Visio diagram and automatically turn it into a PowerPoint slide with 2 clicks. You can even take a process map in Visio, click a button and save it to a Word document. It gets broken out in various ways for creating SOPs and documentation about your process. So these capabilities are all part of the subscription version of Visio, including what we're talking about today. So any questions about the version-itis that we've got going on here on the slide? Okay. Best way to think of Visio Plan 2 is Visio Professional plus. So it's everything that is included in the perpetual license version of Visio Professional plus new cool things. So this capability was released last fall and available currently for BPMN, as I mentioned. And the nice thing about Power Automate is it has connectors to hundreds and hundreds of data sources. It was at Ignite last fall, Microsoft Ignite last fall. It was about 310 or 20 at that point. I know it's more than that by now. So almost regardless where your data lives, a Power Automate can get to it, either to read it or write it or both. You'll see examples of that coming up. You find this capability in Visio Plan 2 on the Process tab. And there is this Microsoft Flow section. You notice that the terminology has not necessarily caught up inside Visio yet. So the Process tab says Microsoft Flow, not Microsoft Power Automate. When you want to use it, you start with Visio. So bear with me here as I get Visio up on the screen. So here is Visio, and just as a quick aside, let me click Account, and you'll notice it says Microsoft Visio Plan 2. So that's how you know that you have the thing you need in order to be able to do what we're doing today.
Scott, there's
yes.
sorry to interrupt, there's a question from Steve out there. Who makes Power Automate?
Oh, good question. Power Automate is a Microsoft product. It's part of that Power platform. I just had a slide. Slide or two I went past quite quickly. I didn't say it at the time, so thank you for the question, Steve. That's all Microsoft. So Power Automate is part of the Power platform suite from Microsoft. Then there's a question I see about the subscription price per month. I can tell you that for Visio Plan 2, it's $15 to $18, depending on whether you purchase monthly or on an annual plan. Power Automate, we'll talk more about toward the end. It actually comes with Office 365. So if you have an O365 subscription, you already have Power Automate. I'm going to click New and go to the Templates page and click on Flowchart. So I'm just opening the standard usual Flowchart template category where we find BPMN, as I mentioned, where we find capabilities for something called Data Visualizer, which I'm not going to talk about today, other than it's part of Visio Plan 2 as well. What I care about is right here, a Microsoft Flow diagram. And here is a blank page and several sample diagrams. I'm going to start with this one just briefly and then go to the blank page. I just want to show you what a diagram can look like. So I'll show you kind of an end state. Click Create, and you'll see a Swimlane diagram. Let's zoom in a little bit here. And this Swimlane diagram happens to include some extra little symbols above the top left corner of each shape. And if I hover over this one, apparently there's going to be a SharePoint list item that gets updated in that step of the process. If I hover here, you'll see that Office 365 Outlook is going to send an email. Here's another one. If I hover here, we see that an updated SharePoint list item is going to get updated. Let's see what this one is down here. There's start an approval process and wait for an approval. So this is just representative of the kinds of things that you can do in a flowchart that is linked with Power Automate. I'm going to come back to this example, but first let's start much simpler. I'm going to start another Visio instance here. And because I used it recently, I have the thumbnail for Microsoft Flow right here. So click once. This time I'm going to choose the blank page and choose Create. Now, what's interesting about this alleged blank page is it's not actually a blank page. Even this blank diagram, in this particular case, this is not usually true. If you go to Flowchart or Swimlane diagram and choose blank diagram, it actually is a blank diagram. But this one in particular has a couple of shapes on it, 3, start, an action, and an end. In order to use the Power Automate capability, we start without it. We start just by doing Visio stuff. So for example, let's say this particular shape, let's lay out a scenario here. What I'd like to do is I would like to monitor my Twitter feed for tweets that use a particular phrase. And whenever that happens, I'd like to send an email to somebody. Seem reasonable? So let's start here by selecting this shape and just start typing, same as you would anytime you create a flowchart in Visio. So I'm going to say monitor Twitter for #Visio. So I'm going to look for that particular hashtag, #Visio. Now, I haven't done that yet. All I'm doing is providing a description at the moment. We'll get there. And then in this case, for this task, what is the action? I'm going to send email notification. So let's be slightly more grammatically correct. Send an email notification. And that's a description of this task. The end, we don't need to do anything with. Now, where this gets really interesting is when we want to actually take advantage of Power Automate. You remember from my slides, there's this tab called Process. And by the way, if you have Visio Standard, you won't even see the Process tab. In fact, both the Data tab and the Process tab are only in Visio Professional or Visio Plan 2. With the Process tab, there is a button here in the Microsoft Power app. Hey, I hadn't noticed that. That label has actually been updated. I'll have to correct my slides. This said said Microsoft Flow fairly recently. So it's been updated. It now says Power Automate. We click the Export button, and I'm going to close the Shape Data window, my favorite window, but we don't need it right now. So let's look at the export panel that has appeared over here. We've got little icons that appeared here. They haven't been configured yet. Let's select this start shape and set a trigger. Now, I mentioned that Power Automate has hundreds of connections to external data sources. Here are just a small set of them. These are 5: Office 365 Outlook, SharePoint, Twitter. I can search. If we have time toward the end, I'll just let you browse through over my shoulder and some of the other hundreds that exist. But for right now, it happens that Twitter is here, so I'm going to pick Twitter. And I have both triggers and actions available. The trigger that I want is when a new tweet is posted. So it's as simple as select this, and notice now a little birdie appears here, so that green triangle went away in favor of something more appropriate. And if I hover, it says Twitter when a new tweet is posted. So pretty easy. Now let's go to this task. Right now we have a generic grayed out icon there because I want to, I haven't done anything yet to configure this for Power Automate, and I do want to do that now. So let me go to the search all actions. I'm going to click the left arrow because I want to clear what is here for Twitter. Refresh, triggers and actions. And now I'm going to use Outlook as part of my Office 365 subscription. There are triggers here. I'm not looking to start something when something happens in Outlook. I want to take an action. So there are 8 triggers and 35 actions. So let's go to the list of actions. Notice this list of actions. This looks pretty much like anything you can do in Outlook. Create a contact, update contacts, find meeting times, update events, get rooms from a list of rooms, get events, get email, move emails, get attachments, all sorts of things. I'm going to go back toward the top of the list because what I want to do is pretty straightforward. I just want to send an email. So I click and whoops, Scott's mistake. Let me undo. By the way, undo is your best friend in Visio, Control Z. I live and breathe Control Z. What I should have done is first click on this task and then choose send email so that that gets associated with this particular task. By the way, as an aside, you do occasionally need to click the refresh button up at the top of the export panel. I've never figured out the precise conditions under which that's required versus not, but let's select it. Okay. It will change, I know it will. Let's try and refresh again. It's not a double click, by the way. Should just be a single click. Okay, well, we'll just wait a moment, sit here and see whether that fixes itself. If not, we'll take some action. I've got a test version of this identical workflow.
So Scott, this is Scott.
Yes.
So for a second there, you clicked that the symbol above in the left-hand corner, that box, and the box turned green. Can you select the action now?
I did try that. I did
Oh,
it
you
quickly
did.
because
It was quick. Oh, it was quick. Okay, because it
yeah,
was like,
I
oh,
actually tried that, Scott. So good thinking.
yeah, does one, yeah, because I thought like, oh, one thing changes the shape and the other thing changes the action, but apparently,
Yeah, no, it's a very good thought. The idea is you select the task or the symbol and then apply um, the action.
right, right.
So, but yeah, good thought. Well, I don't know. I don't know what's up here. Let's see. I'll give it a minute and we'll come back. Now, what we're going to do next is go back to the process tab and the Power Automate section. And we're going to click the export button as soon as we are able and actually export this to Power Automate. Even waiting and being patient is not helping in this case. Tell you what, I don't believe it matters, but just for the heck of it, let's save this diagram. I'll just put it in my temp folder here. Call this Twitter to Outlook. And we'll try this once again. Okay, we've got the right connectors. We've got the shape selected. Select an email. That looks promising. Take that for what it's worth. I can't guarantee that saving was the answer, but we're good. So we have an action configured, and let's move on. So now at this point, I'm going to refresh, and I'm going to click the export button here in the export panel. When I do that, any connectors that I've used, in this case, Twitter and Outlook 365, any connectors that I've used, if I have not previously logged in so that I have access to those services, and by the way, the services could be Salesforce or a SQL database or an Oracle, whatever, among those hundreds of connectors, if I'm not already logged on, down in the lower portion of this dialog, I would have the opportunity to log into each external service. In this case, I'm all set. So I'm going to click the Create Flow button. Here's the name it will have, same as the diagram name, Create Flow. Visio is now communicating behind the scenes with my Office 365 account where Power Automate lives and has set up the flow. I can either go to my flows in Power Automate manually, or let's take advantage of the link that's right here. I'm going to click Power Automate, and that takes me to my browser. And here is this flow called Twitter to Outlook. At this point, what I need to do is configure the rest of the details for how this is going to work. So I'm going to click Edit. And if you've seen Flow in any of its incarnations over the last several years, or Power Automate more recently, this screen will look somewhat familiar. This is how you configure a flow, the steps in a flow in Power Automate. Now, I will warn you, this is not business user friendly. Let me be blunt. And in fact, that's part of the reason for me as a process guy. Part of the reason why I love this integration with Visio is because my business users can deal with flowcharts. Somebody else is needs to worry about the nitty gritty of how to configure exactly what's going to happen and under what conditions. So business users love flowcharts. They're on one side of the chasm. Some of us live on both sides or the other side of the chasm and can make the magic happen. So what is it we're going to do here? We configured in the Visio diagram to monitor Twitter for #Visio. That's just a description. Right now, we need to say, what is it we're going to put in what we actually want to search for in Twitter, and it's #Visio, that particular hashtag. So that's the search text for which we're going to monitor my Twitter flow. Next, I'm going to click Send an Email Notification because I want to configure this step. I'm going to send an email to this particular address. This is my Office 365 address. The subject line I want to use is whatever I want it to be, new Visio tweet. And here's where it gets kind of interesting. I can type text as part of the body of the email message, a new Visio tweet arrived from. Notice this list over here. I can actually pull data from the tweet in order to insert it into the body of this email message. So for example, if I scroll down here, we can say name. So now I'm going to have an email message that will say a new Visio tweet arrived from, and the person's name or their Twitter handle. Let's put a parenthesis, left paren, and I next want to indicate what the Twitter handle is. I'm sorry, name is actually name. Twitter handle is down here somewhere as well. Tweet ID. Nope. Yes, tweet ID. Where's the username? Username. So this is the screen name. Sorry, I forget my Twitter lingo. Carriage return, and I'm actually going to include the body text of the tweet, the tweet itself, by choosing tweet text. And then another carriage return or two, and let's say, thanks, Scott. Now, I'm sending this email to myself. Normally, I might be, maybe I work in marketing and I'm sending this to somebody who cares about the hashtag #Visio, somebody else in my organization. So it's a little recursive here, you know, so I'm emailing myself, but so be it. So now I'm going to say, you know what, this looks pretty good. I've got my keyword, I've got what's going to happen, and I'm going to click save. There is a checker over here in the upper left. If I click that, there are no errors or warnings. So I did a good job in this dramatically simple tweet, but there would be messages here for me to tell me what it is I need to do in order to fix this, in order to make it operable. Now at this point, I want to test. There's a button here for that as well. Power Automate gives me two ways to test. One of them is grayed out. It says use data from previous runs. Makes sense that it's grayed out. I haven't done this before, so it shouldn't be available, and it's not. I'll choose I will perform the trigger action and click the test button. So now I've just activated that tweet, and let's see whether it works. On this tab over here, I have my Twitter feed, and I'm going to paste some text here as a Twitter message. To view any of the tips and tricks webcasts I created for Microsoft Canada last fall, go to this link. Notice #Visio, so I've used my hashtag here, and let's click tweet. So I've just created a new tweet. It does include this hashtag. Let's go to my Outlook account. It may take a moment or two for that trigger to be noticed and to cause this to get updated. But while we're waiting for a new tweet to arrive, you'll notice these are several tweets that were flagged at 11:05 this morning when I was did a quick test just to make sure this all worked. And we got tweets from this user, and that's their hashtag or their Twitter ID, something in French about whatever, and here's Visio, #Visio. Here's somebody else tweeting about Visio using the #Visio hashtag. Here is one that includes what looks like Arabic, perhaps. Another one. And here's a test tweet that I sent this morning. So tell you what, rather than sit here watching paint dry, we'll come back in a moment and see when this tweet, or pardon me, this email about the tweet does arrive. While we're waiting, and by the way, let me also pause here for questions before I go back to this first example. Anything you've seen that's thoroughly confusing, or anything that you've seen that makes sense or that you have questions about?
So Scott, this is Scott again. Does
Yes.
this only go in one direction? So you can do your diagram and then you can export, but then if you made, like you added a step in Flow, it doesn't go backwards? Is that?
An excellent question, Scott. So yeah, this is very real. So here I've got my diagram, and here I've got the list of my flows, including, oops, just updating, bear with me. There we go. So here's the Twitter to Outlook flow that we created this morning, just moments ago. If I were to edit this flow in Power Automate and add steps and do things, the answer to your question, Scott, unfortunately is no, it is not 360-degree trip. So what I do in Visio can be exported to Power Automate, but not the reverse.
That is a bummer.
Yes, it is a bummer, and it's especially a bummer because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of flows that already exist, because Flow has been around for multiple years at this point as a part of the Power Automate suite or the Power Platform. I will tell you that at the Microsoft Ignite conference last fall, when I was working in the Microsoft booth, that question came up pretty regularly, as you might imagine, and the answer was the official answer from Microsoft was not yet. It's clearly in their product plan to do that, and I hope it happens soon. I don't have any idea of the timeline, but I'm confident you will see it. I just don't know when.
Okay.
Scott, oh, sorry, Scott. Were you done, Scott Freeman?
Yes.
Nick Patel came in with a question and said, can email be sent to multiple people or groups?
Yes, absolutely. I guess my answer is even more generic. If you can do it manually, Flow, Power Automate can do it. And that there are probably some exceptions, but yes, very definitely. In fact, when I configured this email, I just happened to put one addressee here, but that could be a distribution list from my address book. It could be a comma or semicolon separated list of multiple people. Yeah, no question. Let's go back and see whether we have mail. Not yet, so we'll come back one more time before we're all finished. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier, but I do have on my closing slide, I've got contact information for me, including my email address, which is actually fairly simple, Scott@Visio step by step, just like the title of the book. So it's Scott@visiostepbystep.com. If you have any questions after the fact, or if you'd like me if you'd like to be added to my very occasional mailing list, I'd be happy to do that. Send me an email. We'll put that information up at the end. I'm cognizant of the fact that a couple of people have to leave. So let's go back to this more complicated diagram. I want to show you a little bit about what editing a more complex flowchart might look like, or swimlane diagram in this case. It's no different than the simple one we started with that had only 3 shapes on it. In this particular case, let's say this happens to be a sample diagram from Visio. You saw me open it earlier. It's a purchase order workflow, so fairly real world process. We're going to get a purchase request, start the procurement approval process. If the request has complete information, we continue on. Otherwise, we reject it and update a SharePoint list to say this is not a valid purchase request. But if it is valid, we go to a SharePoint list to retrieve supplier data. We start the budget approval process. If we have budget approval, then we send a purchase order to the supplier and set the file status as accepted. So we make note that this is a purchase order that's been accepted. If we don't get budget approval, then we reject and update the SharePoint list to say rejected. In my view, I would also like to notify the requester that their purchase request was declined. So I'd like to modify this flow by doing this. I'm going to drag a new task over, and I'm just going to drop it right here on this line on the rejected path. Visio inserted that step. It does not have any Power Automate triggers or actions associated with it yet, but we can do that. We just need to go to the Process tab, click Export, which opens the export window over here on the right side. Now we have that gray symbol. So we've got the placeholder for a trigger or an action. Let's go to Triggers and Actions. And I actually we'll use Outlook, but I want to show you how complete this set is. I mentioned there were hundreds of things from which you could get data or to which you can send data. And you'll see a bunch of Microsoft products up here at the top. But if we scroll down, you'll see, I don't even know what many of these things are. The Adobe Creative Suite, whoops, didn't need to click on that. The Adobe Creative Suite, do know about that. RSS, for those of us who are old and actually know what RSS is. Amazon Redshift, Azure App Services, Campfire, no idea. PKI Cloud Management, Civic Plus, more Microsoft products, Google Drive, Google Sheets. So you can actually read data or write data to a Google Sheet from a Power Automate flow. MailChimp, I actually, for a theater group I'm president of, we use MailChimp for our outgoing emails. SQL, you get the idea here. Trello, Smartsheets, all kinds of things. So pretty much wherever your data lives or needs to live, you probably can deal with it here. I'm going to search for Outlook. And I'm going to use Outlook.com, choose Actions, and let's send an email. Oops, missed it. There it is. Send an email. And at some moment, this little icon will change, and we could go ahead and configure it. Now, configuring this more complex flow is no easier or harder than configuring the simple one that we were looking at just a moment ago. All we would need to do is refresh, click Export, and move into Power Automate and take care of the work there. Decisions are worth a quick note. There are two decisions in this particular process. Let's zoom in here. This particular one has a yes path and a no path, pretty straightforward. This one over here has paths that are labeled rejected and accepted. Now, Power Automate understands yes and no. It doesn't necessarily understand other words for decision outcomes, but guess what? That's very easy to configure. When I select this shape, notice this portion of the export panel highlights, and what appears on the drop-down list is the actual text from the outgoing paths. And I just say rejected means no, and accepted means yes. So couldn't get much easier than that. Now I've set my flowchart to read the way I want it to, but I've configured Power Automate so that it will take action according to the decision results. Let me show you what that flow will look like back in our list of flows. I didn't export that particular one, but I did do this previously. Here's the purchase order process, and let's edit it. When you use the flow editor, the Power Automate editor, then there are places where there are decisions like this, and here's the if yes path and the if no path. The if no path can have multiple, and either of those branches could have additional decisions along the way as well. And they're all configured in very much the same way we configured the simple case for our simple tweet. Now, let's go back and speaking of that tweet, I don't know.
Scott, we have a question here.
Oh, yes.
Sorry. So from Sandy, to turn it off later, do you have an unexport option?
Very good point, because not all flows do you want to run permanently. There is actually just that. If I go back to the list of flows don't need to worry about saving changes. Let's take my Twitter to Outlook flow. There is right here a button that says turn off. So if I disable it, it's now off. Notice the status off right here. If I turn it back on, status changes to on. So you can do that manually. I am not enough of a Power Automate expert to know the answer to this question, but I believe that you can also automate the activation or deactivation of a particular flow. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's true. But you certainly can do it manually as you asked.
And then Diane, oh, you got it. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, just happened to see it. So Diane said, do you have the option of having more than one action take place? Absolutely. Yes, you can have parallel paths, Diane, so that if you have an action that results in 3 parallel actions, you can lay that out in your flowchart, export it, configure it in Power Automate. Very definitely. All right. Well, for some reason, we're not getting the results from my latest tweet, but you can see that at 11:10 this morning, it worked okay. Any more questions? I've got a few slides to wrap up.
Scott, this is Scott again. On that Twitter one,
Yeah.
isn't that really? I mean, when you tested the first one, I mean, it just came in right when the tweet generated.
Yeah, no, there was a couple-minute delay. It was probably 2 or 3, but not 10 or 15 like now.
Yeah, just because it seems like, wow, that's a pretty heavy-duty monitoring for that particular thing, right? Because like there's zillions of tweets that get generated every second.
Yep.
Right, and have that flow, look at that all the time. Yeah, I wonder how that works. Anyway.
Yeah, good question. I don't know how the load balancing happens.
Right.
Don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, if you notice the 4 that are here that have a timestamp of 11:05, that's when I went to my list of flows and I took this old version of the same thing we created a few minutes ago and I simply activated it. I turned it on and
Right.
it was right at about 11:05.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came to my inbox, these 4 appeared almost instantly. And then this one, you notice, was 5 minutes later.
Right.
So I don't know exactly how the monitoring of Twitter happens in this case or how often it happens.
There you go.
There we go. Speak of the devil. And it actually happened twice. So I guess we waited long enough that they decided, well, let's send it twice. No. So here is, oh no, that's somebody else's tweet.
Mm.
And there's mine.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, this is the tweet we created. It's just a longer delay, busy time. Maybe it's only every few minutes that they, every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We just didn't happen to catch the time interval till just now. I don't know how it works on the back end. But there we go. I'm glad it did arrive. I did want you to have the feeling that this truly was real. Other questions?
I have a very particular, a very detailed question. So I built one of these about 2 weekends ago.
Okay.
And when you do a parallel path, it talks about, it doesn't call it threading. It calls like sequential. Oh, what is the words they use? Like every time you split something, it says like I could run this in parallel or sequentially. Have you run across that? I don't remember what the message is now.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just simulate it very quickly here.
But I was always afraid to make it do too much at the same time, because I wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah, no, I understand that entirely. Oops.
And that was, yeah, when it got into, I haven't used this mechanism with the Visio. I didn't even know it existed, but.
Right. So this is the idea, similar to Diane's question and what you've just asked about.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got it's a parallel process here. Let me just see whether I can quickly add two actions. They don't need to mean anything, but at least we'll have actions on here. Triggers and actions. Sure, we'll send an email for both of them. There's one. Now we're back to
right, not working. Yeah, not refreshing.
Yeah. Today's the first time I've seen that particular odd behavior. But then this is not something I use daily.
Is Microsoft Build doing it? Maybe they're breaking it while they're showing it to somebody else.
Maybe. I'll tell you what we should be able to do, though, is we should still be able to export. No, it won't let me export without an action.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, you don't have to go through all this pain. I was just, if you had it on the top of your head, I was just kind of wondering what, I could look it up in the documentation. I was just kind of wondering like, oh yeah, maybe I don't want too many parallel things going on because I'm not sure if I'd get into some kind of weird condition. So I just ignored it.
Yep, I don't know specifically, but if you want to hang around at the end, Scott, if we get this working, I'll try it. Just for curiosity, because now I'm kind of curious too. Worst case, I'll try it after the fact.
Yeah.
Any other questions before I move on to a couple of concluding slides?
The question, one of them was earlier on about the Power Automate cost.
Oh yes, yeah. Let's get to that. That is in the slides here. So where do you go to get more information? So you need to have an Office 365 subscription. And Power Automate is included. So there's actually no cost for Power Automate, with a big caveat. The included version of Power Automate includes a certain number of executed flows. And that's the way Microsoft ultimately makes money on Power Automate, is they charge per flow or per 1,000 flows or whatever the particular metric is. So if you are using Office 365, you get a bunch of flows free. If you need more than that, then you can subscribe for additional flows. I believe it's per month. Most things are. Visio Plan 2 is, just go there for a second.
And as you're going there, the Power Automate also has premium connectors, and you got to pay extra for that.
That's true as well. You get hundreds of them at no extra cost, but there are some. Do you remember offhand what some of them are, Scott?
Well, for instance, like you could say, hey, I'm going to generate an Office, an Outlook email. But then if you said, hey, I want to generate a new DevOps issue, that's like a premium connector. Or some of those other services, those billions of services, it'll say, oh, that's a premium connector.
Yes, that is true. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah, so then there's extra cost. And then, of course, to use those other services, you would have to have the subscription to those services.
Yes, absolutely. You have to have an account for whatever it is that you want to read from or write to. Yes.
Right.
So here's Visio Plan 2. I just went to visio.com, which redirects to a Microsoft.com page. And it is $15 a month with an annual commitment. It's $18 per month if you pay month by month. Your company, if you work for a university or a commercial organization or a government agency, you may very well have a discounted price off that, but that's the list price, the retail price. Melissa said, if I exceed monthly flows and don't subscribe for more, will you be suspended until the next month? That's my understanding, Melissa, yes.
Yeah, I actually experienced that. My flows ended up stopping for like half the month because I accidentally built a flow that ran too much. So just watch for that.
Thank you. Good advice. You can begin your journey by doing what we did, which is going to the Microsoft Flow template or Power Automate template in Visio. You can actually start from within BPMN. So if you have an existing BPMN diagram, go to the Process tab, click Export, and you can start to configure all of your existing BPMN shapes that way. I will also tell you, I mentioned this casually at the beginning, I'll mention it now. It is possible to use other than BPMN shapes. It just takes a bit of work. You've got to know some Visio internals in order to be able to configure shapes such that they can be used with Power Automate. Yep, export button on the process tab, and then places to get more information. These are some general Microsoft locations. Experts Exchange is an IT help service of which I'm one of the regular Visio experts. So here's a short link to take you to the Visio portion of Experts Exchange. There's a Visio enthusiasts group at LinkedIn, which is very sporadic. Sometimes there'll be a bunch of posts in a month or two, a period of a month or two, and then nothing for months at a time. But it's worth checking out. You might meet some interesting folks there and see some good discussions. Here's a whole set of links, 4 links for different parts of the Power Platform, including Power BI and Power Automate second on the list here. This is my information. If you're interested in my LinkedIn Learning Visio courses, they're over here on the left. TaskMap, if you want to find out more, taskmap.com. There is a 30-day free trial, end of sales pitch. We do customize Visio, create custom shapes, custom diagrams, stencils, and templates. Contact me for information about any of those things. My books are available either from all the usual suspect places, Amazon and so forth, or from my website, visiostepbystep.com, or from the Microsoft Press website. And in fact, if you use my last name as the coupon code at Microsoft Press, then you get a third off the price of the book. And finally, this is where to find me. If you are interested in getting an occasional email from me, I'd be happy to add you to my mailing list. Just send me an email and I'll be glad to add you. My Twitter feed at VizProcess, that's the Twitter account that we were using to send our sample tweets. Other than that, I'll end the slides. Actually, I'll just leave this up on the screen for a few minutes, but I'm happy to take questions. If you need to leave, thank you. I appreciate your time and attention. And otherwise, I'll hang around for a few more minutes.
Perfect. So any other questions here? I will also just say thank you everyone for joining. We are very interested in your feedback as this is our first virtual event. Any thoughts, comments, anything we do to make it better, please send them to myself, Neil, anyone on the board, and we will put all those together. So thank you there. And Scott, thank you very much. This was a great presentation. I learned a lot, much more technical than we usually do. So there was a nice change,
Yep.
and I appreciate it. So there we are. I don't see any other questions. So maybe give people just another minute to either sign off or have another question.
And also, David, don't forget between you and Neil to send me a name, an address, and I'll be happy to mail the book to some lucky person. Well, it's your call whether you decide you're lucky or not, but to the designated winner.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, we will pass a name along, which we will draw randomly from a hat, or maybe I'll have my dog choose it. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we will send something along. So perfect.
Cool.
All right. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again for everyone. Thank you, Scott. It was great. If you want to pick up your PDUs, you can go to the PMICV website. There's a code there, and drop those in, and you should be able to pick them up easily. Any questions around that, yeah, please reach out to the board, and we'll help you out. So,
All right.
great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
thank
Scott.
you.
Thanks for hosting,
care.
David.
Scott.
Bye.
Absolutely. There they all go. All right. So I think it's just you and me. Thanks again, Scott. That was fantastic.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll be happy to do something again next year or whenever. So
Sounds great. Perfect.
take care.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.